Thank you. Good evening, folks. Good evening. Thank you. These are all Toronto Maple Leaf fans. That's why they showed up tonight to support me, who's a Leaf fan. I had a discussion with Brian Burke last week, and I left it, and I think the conclusion we came to that rebuilding the Leafs is going to be a tougher job than rebuilding Afghanistan. Actually, I'm pretty certain of that. And nonetheless, I'm an eternal optimist.
It'll probably take longer. The General, we have a lot to talk about. There's a tremendous amount of history here, and of course a lot of very interesting things raised in your book. But as so often is the case in our business, we have been taken over by news, and I thought it would be an appropriate way to start tonight to give you an opportunity. I believe this is the first time you've appeared in public since Richard Colvin's testimony yesterday at the Commons Committee, and give you a chance to respond to that. As you know, a great many Canadians heard that testimony or have read coverage of it, seen it. It's been running pretty well 24/7 since then. And the implication of what he said, and for anyone who doesn't know who Richard Colvin is, a senior Canadian diplomat now based in Washington but did spend 17 months in Afghanistan, was that people at the very top of the Canadian government, including yourself and at least one defense minister, Peter MacKay, and perhaps two, knew or should have been aware that prisoners that were being handed over to the Afghanistan authorities were being tortured. And that raises, of course, questions of whether or not people in the Canadian government are in fact complicit in a war crime. And I wanted to give you the opportunity to respond to that. It's obviously a very serious allegation, and I don't know if you've heard, but some of his testimony was corroborated today by one of his British colleagues, European colleagues, who has also served in Afghanistan. So would you like to respond to that and deal with some of those questions that are out there that many Canadians are asking?
Actually, Jim, I'd love to respond to it, and just interesting because I've been out in the public eye these last 2 days. I've been very busy, so I haven't had a chance to see much of the coverage. But what I saw yesterday afternoon, about 10 minutes of TV coverage, looked like a pack of howling dogs howling at the moon up in Ottawa. It's quite interesting watching our junior kindergarten level of antics on parliamentary committees and in our question periods. And God, it's embarrassing at times to have that. They are not worthy of our great country. I'll simply tell you that. Let me just say, I'm not in the business of patting governments on the back, but I actually think the government of Canada, in this incredibly difficult challenge of taking detainees who we catch in the act of trying to kill or having killed our soldiers, men with explosive residue on their hands at level 3, which means they've been making mines and improvised explosive devices. This incredible challenge of being able to take them and responsibly hand them first to the Americans back in, what was it, 01 to 05 or so, and then to the Afghans, I think has been actually handled very well by our government. They have responded. We have a good system in place right now. It took a while to come to that. And here's what I would say to you. We always had concerns about those handovers. Obviously, Afghanistan was a failed state and we were trying to help them rebuild. B, we handed them over with the agreement of a government of Canada to a government of Afghanistan agreement for which Foreign Affairs had a responsibility to monitor. C, there has been no smoking gun that ever caught my attention. The guy said some things and really nothing ever caught my attention based on what he perceived he said or perceived he sent. I don't remember actually reading a single of his cables. It doesn't stick out in my mind. And actually, when he says he was sending those cables that everybody in Ottawa yesterday was calling explosive, I actually was in Afghanistan in Kandahar. Actually was at the provincial reconstruction team, met all the civilians there. He doesn't stick out in my mind. I probably met him, but certainly I'll tell you this. Nobody articulated for me that they had an explosive gun, that somebody was being tortured and somebody had seen this, etc. So actually I think the perception is completely different from the reality. I think there's a lot more of that discussion to come out, and actually I wish it would just be handled in a mature, responsible manner, which I think would be appropriate.
Well, maybe we can do some of that here tonight, and we could look at perhaps a place to start is is it in your judgment, as a very senior military officer, is it in fact a war crime, or are we complicit in a war crime if we do hand over prisoners to any other force or power that there are credible reports of abuse or torture?
Well, first of all, no, I don't believe we are complicit in any war crimes whatsoever. And I think we had a responsible system in place. We realized through 07 in particular, in fact I wrote about that in my book, that actually we had some concerns now that had been elevated. The agreement was changed. I thought that was a responsible approach to those concerns. Then we had further concerns in later 07, which my commanders in the field brought to my attention, and we made a decision to stop the transfer for a period of time until we actually addressed those concerns. And actually I think they were addressed in a very responsible manner, and so therefore I'm very comfortable. My focus in 06 and 07 was on protecting my soldiers. We had young men and women that were being attacked, were being shot at, were being blown up on a daily basis, and so when you have a number of priorities, making sure they had the right equipment, making sure they had the right training, making sure they had what they needed on the ground to the mission that our country had asked them to do was my number one focus. I was comfortable in the spectrum of things. We had it about right. Learned every single day. There is no perfection, right? There is no perfection. Even in our own prisons, somebody can get beaten up, and we know that occurs, sadly, despite all the great sort of guidelines and professionalism that we have. So I was comfortable. We had the right process in place, up to Foreign Affairs to work with the government of Afghanistan to ensure their end was carried. And actually, I think, as I said earlier, I think the government of Canada has actually handled this in a pretty responsible manner.
You say in your book that, and I think the history is pretty clear on this, that concern over the treatment of prisoners was kind of, as in your words in the book, a bubbling issue that continued, but you were aware of it from the moment, at least the concern about it was a concern of yours from the moment we arrived in Afghanistan. Was there any single moment when you thought that those allegations were so significant that it demanded a change in policy? And there obviously was a series of changes in the way we treated that. But one of Mr. Colvin's comments was that he reported his memos went directly to Mogoche, and that he expected them to go up the line of command to you. And now you've said tonight that you don't remember seeing those.
Mr. Colvin,
was there ever a moment when you thought, this is a real worry for us, we really have to do something about it?
Yeah, there was. And that moment was in the fall of 2007, when we'd had a series of events occur, followed by with visits to the detention center with very precise, focused reports that said, we've got a problem. And when we found that out, I talked to my commanders in Afghanistan, listened to their counsel and advice, understood their concerns, and supported them in the decision to stop temporarily transferring detainees to the Afghan government until we had put in corrective measures. And that was, increased visits, better infrastructure, some more training support, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And in fact, all that did occur.
But in February 2008, if I recall correctly, and you do write about this in the book, you were here in Toronto at the Garrison Ball, and in the book you talk about this. You say, and you use the word squawking and bullshit about the.
I can't believe I used that word.
Yeah. Actually, I had to read it a couple of times myself. I know from talking to you, General, in Ottawa, and
my mother would be up spanking me on the arms right now, I'll tell you that.